Inspired by North America, perhaps.
You know the classic NA inspiring Korea.
Yo. Yo. Is it? They just copied NRG's homework. Yo. So we gotta talk about how T1 kind of caught on to the North American technology with the Senatom. It's kind of a cook. And I do like the drafts that T1 are doing here. I think they're not afraid to really mess around. They're super confident in what they think is good and what their playstyle is, and they really do not care very much about what other teams draft and like what they go for. And I think that's like super cool. So I'm gonna break down this draft for you guys, kind of understand why the meta is kind of evolving in this sense, and kind of called it, to be honest with you. I don't think that the meta that I was seeing is kind of super rigid, and because of the stakes, a lot of people are just super afraid of trying different things. Maybe scrim results could have something to do with this, but I digress. It's a little bit rough. So let's talk about this game 1 draft. I don't really think there's anything too special or as spicy as the G2 NRG drafts. So let's take a look. The first thing that's interesting, I would say, is that BLG strangely go for a Renata ban. So this is just probably straight scrim stuff, right? I think BLG probably very forward team, very chaotic Chinese team, and they are hard stopped by champions like this. I mean, Xayah is kind of a similar vein. It's just that she's built into the AD carry, but Renata in this case is, I'd say, a little bit more of a unique pick. Then what else is unique is the J4B1, which a lot of teams have pretty much dropped because it's very hard to get a lot of success with it. In a vacuum, this champion is pretty strong, right? But there are a lot of other champions that are pretty strong, like the Maokai, right? Like Lee Sin is still pretty good, although we've been seeing it very little. We've been seeing some Vi, things of that nature. Technically, this is the most blindable remaining champion, right? It fits into pretty much every composition. A lot of teams would opt instead to go Orianna, but they have foregone it in this case, right? So they actually give BLG the Orianna Renekton combo. Nothing crazy in the world because Rumble has sort of superseded Renekton, but it's banned, so it kind of goes down the list. This is most likely because they just kind of want to suppress Yagao. It's almost like a, here you go, dude, here's Orianna. And this is like on that point of forcing the draft in your favor. So they want Yagao to just worry about this pick and kind of stylistically go in this direction instead, and T1 are down for that. I think this iteration of T1 is pretty standard. So whenever they can force compositions to be evened out in that sense, they're pretty chill with it, right? And look at this. They're playing, this is looking a lot familiar, right? These impenetrable fortress drafts that we've seen in years past. So maybe Worlds 2021 even, or even last year a little bit, but not so much with like some counter picks being available. But with this overall direction, T1 oftentimes like to play it safe, right? And it's because of champions like this. Rel and Kai'Sa. Nothing really new at this point. And I think a lot of these engaged champions are kind of getting stale, to be honest with you. I don't really think this meta is as solved as people think, right? We've been seeing it picked so often, and quote unquote, these champions have high win rates and such, but would you look at this, right? Just like NRG, T1 opt for Senatom, right? This is why they're willing to sack jungle a little bit for this, right? There's not a lot of champions they can just open up with. Jarvan is technically the most openable, even though it has some weaknesses, but they're willing to pay for it in order to push resources backwards towards Senatom. And from this point in Worlds, right, we're probably just not going to see much of this Xayah Kai'Sa dynamic anymore. I think the last version of this will probably be like maybe a Xayah ban or something like that. And then teams will have to be a lot more careful with where they pick AD carry. As like I mentioned in the previous videos, and honestly with a lot of these drafts, like counter picking ADC is probably one of the things you can do best, right? Or picking champions that don't really have counters, right, is going to be the way forward. We saw T1. I really commended T1 for doing this before with the Ashe. In their very first match, it was their first or second match where they B3'd Ashe. That is one of the strongest picks right now, for sure. Teams are just very scared of it because there's a lot of champions that give these types of things problems. But if you're drafting like this anyway and giving it a lot of resources, this is where I see the eventual meta sort of comprising, right? It's really more of like a scaling set. There's a lot of aggressive comps, but it's very easy to force this into your favor and kind of shut down these really aggressive lanes. So really should be tapping into these resources here, right? And that's what's happening here. Even though they have a lot of pressure on the map early game, it's really shut down by T1 a lot of times, right? So basically BLG have to play through top, but Nara is probably one of the best sort of suppressing champions that go into it. Senna Tom, this bot lane's done for, right? Like there's nothing you can really do. It's just a stat check, like I mentioned last time. Jarvan Nidalee is like, it's somewhat Nidalee favored, but it's not enough to really care, and everything else is just neutral. And with this in mind, that being neutral is great for T1 because they just outscale and they just let Senna Tom get huge, and they can't really do much about this, right? And there was even some chaos in the game early as well. Like this is technically like good on BLG considering the circumstances, but they want to force something, but the problem is their champions cannot really deal with Senna Tom in this sense, right? And this is why they get punished in the early. Like it's good on them to try, but the real answer here is to just not put themselves in this situation in the first place, because stuff like this is kind of coin flip if you think about it. It's very chaotic, and although if you're given these 10 champions in this scenario, your solution is to make the game chaotic, you could also just pick champions that prevent this situation from happening. And that's the idea of draft in an umbrella, just making it as easy as possible with as many options as possible for your team to succeed. Right, we can see this in the rest of this game. It plays pretty similarly to how you would expect it to, at least judging from like the G2 NRG series as well. Like Senna Tom just have really good lane pressure and poke, and they do nothing, and then they can use it to just slowly make BLG bleed out and make them take increasingly worse and worse fights. And this will eventually just cause them to make a game-losing fight, which they basically do here, because at this point, you can feel their desperation engage. This is a perfect example. T1, insane backline suppression. They can do whatever they want. They have a lot of conditions here. They just play their space. All they have to do is wait for BLG to go in on them. Let's forget the fact that they're not even really playing for anything, right? They're just chilling. But BLG feels so obligated to engage because at this point, if they don't do something within the next 5 to 10 minutes, they are probably just going to lose the game. BLG on. Objectively speaking, this is probably a pretty shit engage, but at this point, you've invested so much tempo here with your champions that really need to get something done in order to really win the game, and it's a pretty trash engage overall, right? Look, they get a hard engage onto the backline gets bailed out because this comp can only dive backline, but when you can bail out your backline like this and suppress lane, it's just Jover, right? There's not much you can do. So when you lose early and you lose late like this, it's just really hard. So the solution here is that whatever they prioritize with BLG is not the meta anymore. The meta is pending evolution, right? Because what would happen here is that, okay, if Senna Tom is better now, if it's this good and suppresses everything that's good, then clearly this is the meta. This is not meta anymore. This is a wrong read. So we have to switch what we're picking. So it's Senna Tom's meta, we can ban Senna. Or we can think of counter picks. We can go into the semantics about like giga scaling comps. We get stuff like the Ziggs or the Seraphine like we did before with metas like that. And it's admittedly a little cringe, but you get the gist of it, right? Game 2. My fault. Game 2. We kind of see a similar thing here, right? There's a lot of teams that they just thought that this is what's good, and they go for it, right? BLG diagnosed Azir is the problem. I mean, it can be, but I wouldn't say it's absolutely insane. T1 banned Rakan, which I think is smart. Rakan is the better of the two. You cannot convince me. Rakan is the better. The reason for Rakan being better of the Xayah-Rakan duo is because Xayah has things that are replaceable. Yes, the ultimate is irreplaceable, but there are other tools within the game that can be drafted to create space around them. And there's a lot of AD carries that are available, and we're not in the meta where ADC protection is so limited and so important that carries need to self-suppress it or self-sustain it, right? Rakan exists in a pool of arguably much smaller support pools, and he scales better. He has a lot more playmaking potential and a lot more room, no pressure to really do stuff in the early game, and it's just a lot more comfortable for a lot of teams, right? There's nothing wrong with things like Nautilus, Alistar, Rel, but it just forces teams to really think about how to win, right? To be honest, if I'm T1, I take this every time, right? Teams are okay with like just letting Xayah through now. This champion has bad matchups, especially when it's by itself, right? You can pick so many AD carries that are like going to give you a lot of presence in lane because she's short range. She doesn't have that much kill pressure without Rakan in the early phases compared to some AD carries, and it's just not that much. It's not that much damage output, especially. You can see this counter here. This is basically best in slot both picks here for T1, right? Orianna and J4 because it is the jungler that counters Xayah because his engage still works. So really, you B1 Xayah just so you can lose resources in draft. That's kind of crazy to me. And this is just because they prioritize different things. Even if T1 just opened Orianna like they took it away from T1 last time, they would be in a better spot because compared to AD carry, which has a lot of substitutions, Orianna is probably one of the few, maybe like 4 to 5 mid laners that are pretty usable in this world's meta. And we just see BLG blind everything at this point, right? It's not like anything special. They don't gain any advantage here. This counter pick mid doesn't really do anything. They blind Jax, which is cool, and I guess they want to get pressure topside and invest resources into that. But they know they just don't really have to worry about team fighting anymore, right? And the only way T1 would really lose this is if BLG have tools to specifically circumvent that the general list team fighting that they're about to draft. Like, it's pretty premeditated, I would say. They're not going to draft forward against a champion like Xayah, so they can just stat check Xayah, which is a very valid option. And this is why the Jinx on 4, a champion with 0 presence in Worlds, by the way. What is it? This is the second pick of Jinx at Worlds. Like, do people think that there's only 2 AD carries in the game? T1 certainly don't, right? They're very experimental and they have seen a lot of options. There's no reason for these other AD carries to not be useful. So, binding Xayah is the biggest fallacy that most of these players can have. And it's a similar issue with BLG where they kind of just already show you what their comp is going to do because they save their 2 least flexible roles for the last picks, and you may as well have shown all 5 picks because they already know what all 5 picks are. And we're in another predicament where T1 outscale. They have decent advantage in lane due to the Jinx HP advantage, or range advantage rather, and the Tahm Kench suppressing lane. Their Jax is suppressed because of Gragas, which is a pick that's also not very common right now. And even though they picked Vi, which is probably one of the best junglers to try to deal with Jinx, it has a free bailout. So like, it's just a wrong meta read. And I love that teams like T1 and NRG are the ones to make it through, and they're the ones that are challenging this dynamic, right? It's just very easy for them. I'll give it to BLG. If I recall, it's a little bit more chaotic this game, but the margin for error on T1 is huge. They don't have to do anything. You know, they could die a few times. It doesn't really matter because give it 20 minutes. This Xayah is doing nothing, man. It doesn't matter. What is Xayah ulting? She does not care. I mean, there's literally nothing to ult, right? And you can argue she did nothing in lane 2. So what does this champion do? Right? So this is why I like the creativity that T1 are really leaning to in here, right? There's like no other team that's like very adventurous with their drafts like this, while maintaining their style, of course. But they just have such a strong grasp of what champions counter what the enemy team is trying to do. And this is where that self-balancing meta comes in, right? It's not that rigid. There's lots of great champions. So that is the main lesson from today, right? The outcome of this for many teams would probably be pushing AD carry way back in draft. Second phase, definitely. There's probably 6, 7 AD carries, 8 AD carries that are good. And they create different styles of comps where basically no other role maybe except top or support that can really do this. So that is something to keep in mind. This is this is pre-buff Jinx, by the way. That's going 11 now. So this is a 48 win rate champ who's typically balanced around 51 win rate. And T1 make it look turbo broken. But BLG got Xayah. How did they lose? Because it's the wrong pick. And T1 show time and time again that you gotta challenge the norm a little bit. The norm is just based off what people think is good. What if people think incorrectly, right? Thanks for watching, guys. Catch you in the next one. See ya.